In the morning, we discussed the history of parental alienation. We discussed scientific advances in understanding parental alienation, domestic violence, and child abuse, and advances in memory research. This afternoon, we'll switch to the impact of parental alienation on the people involved. We will start with a segment that, 4 parts, scientific understanding of the impact of parental alienation on the family. And first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Devin Mullins. She will present Like Burying My Relationship with My Children, Relational Turning Points Experienced by Both Alienated Parents and Adult Children of Parental Alienation. Dr. M. Devin Mullins is a current postdoctoral research associate in the Family Health Lifespan Communication Lab and Communication and Healthcare Lab at the University of Florida, and also a child of parental alienation. Dr. Mullins?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for braving the rain to come back. I'm Devin Mullins. It's okay. I get it all the time. It's an honor to be here. This is what I'm presenting as part of my dissertation. So I'm a recent graduate, and I am standing in front of a room of professional psychologists, researchers that I have read so much about and so much of their work, and I've cited their work. So I am humbled to be here, and I'm excited to get my research and my perspective out into this parental alienation study group and field. So to start, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit, since this is my first time at the Parental Alienation Study Group conference. Like I said, I just recently, it feels recently, but it was 2 years ago, got my PhD in communication. Weird how time works post-COVID, I don't know. PhD in communication, which I'll talk a little bit about what that means and what that is. So my biography that was just introduced is a little bit dated. I'm no longer a postdoctoral research associate. I am a part-time research associate through the College of Medicine in their health outcomes department at the University of Florida. I kind of stepped away from researching for a while because for the past 1.5 years, I was stepping into becoming a new mom, and boy, is that a doozy. But here I am back, and I'm excited to be back. So my specialization is in family communication and health, which basically means I research how communication can be used as a tool to enhance family well-being or family health throughout the lifespan and in various contexts. So like I said, part of what I'm presenting today is from my dissertation, and another part of my dissertation has been published. It is in the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage. So if you would like to check that out, it is about the challenges that alienated parents face when reconnecting with their adult child. So what is communication research? I wanted to kind of take a step back and introduce communication as a social scientific field of study, because I believe I am the first communication scholar to present at Parental Alienation Study Group. So communication research is a relatively new field, especially when you compare it to other social sciences. We kind of got our root in the late 80s, early 90s. It's a massive field that's divided into 2 different groups. Mass communication, which is probably what you are most familiar with. Those are students in journalism, public relations, media messaging. But then we also have a smaller group that focuses on interpersonal communication. So how we exchange information and ideas in our relationships with one another, how we communicate, how we talk to each other. And an even smaller segment of interpersonal communication research is family communication research. So how communication is used within the system to create healthy or unhealthy dynamics within that family. And this is kind of a busy model, but I wanted to just focus on that center where it says co-creation of meaning. That is really foundational to communication research, and it shows just how important communication is in our day-to-day lives. How we talk to other people and how people talk to us creates our shared realities and how we go about our daily lives. Communication is everywhere. Even though I'm the one talking at you guys right now, you are all communicating back to me in your nonverbal communication. Either you're making eye contact with me or your body positioning. And this is usually where I see a lot of people fidgeting like, oh, she's analyzing me. I'm not. I'm just saying that you cannot not communicate. And that's why communication is such a fundamental aspect of our well-being and our relationships throughout our lifespan. So to jump into the actual study that I will be presenting today, I wanted to kind of take a broad approach to parental alienation, since very few scholars in communication have focused on family distancing contexts, and even little. I only know of one other who have specifically studied parental alienation. So I want to take a step back and try to look at it from a longitudinal lifespan perspective of the relational bond between the parent and the child. So I use lifespan theory, which emphasizes, how we can examine phenomena across time and how relationships change across time. So I specifically looked at how the alienated parent-child bond changes throughout the life course due to PA, so what's impacted within the relationship. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of actual longitudinal studies on parental alienation, but from point-in-time data, we can see that there are multiple phases of PA throughout the lifespan. Typically, it occurs during or after a divorce. A parent consciously or unconsciously exhibits alienating behaviors that are then manifested through the child into alienation, which usually involves a decrease in communication between parent or child, or a physical separation, emotional separation. And then sometimes there is a phase of reconnection where we are focused on rebuilding a healthy relationship between the parent and the child. And through Dr. Baker's work with some adult children, her interviews with 40 adult children, she also found that there's a process of realization for adult children that can be a part of the reconnection phase, where she found 11 catalysts for realizing what occurred through the child's alienation experiences. So turning points as a research method, this is what I selected in order to take that wide view of what the relationship looks like across the lifespan. So turning points are conceptualized as moments of change perceived by the participant. Basically, it asks the participant to think of impactful moments throughout their relational history with the parent or child, and to plot them on a line graph. And I'll kind of go through step-by-step the procedure that my participants went through. Time, the x-axis is always time, so we are seeing the relational trajectory across time. And then the y-axis can be any sort of relational variable. And for my study, I focus on relational closeness. It can be anything like relational satisfaction, intimacy, any type of relational variable. But for this, I focused on closeness, which I conceptualized as the bond a person feels toward the parent or child, which will manifest through communication events within the relationship. And the really neat thing about turning points as a research method is it allows you not only to capture specific critical events that happen within the relationship that impact whatever relational variable you're focusing on. So for my study, how the closeness one felt toward their parent or child was impacted, but it also gives you a graphical visual representation of the relationship across time. So this is the example turning point graph that my participants were sent with detailed instructions of how to fill out a turning point graph. And so they were instructed to start with their baseline, which was their earliest memory of feeling close with their child. Now, naturally, a lot of those were the birth of the child, and they were to put how close they felt at that event as their baseline, and then think of all the impactful events throughout their relational history that impacted their feelings of closeness with their child. They plotted each point and labeled them across time, and then they were instructed to end the graph with how close do you feel with your child today? And then once all the points were plotted, they were instructed to draw a line, and voila, a visual representation of their relational trajectory. So my driving research questions for this study were, what turning points do alienated parents experience that impact relational closeness with their alienated child across PA? And I also talked to several adult children. So there was also what turning points do adult children experience? And then the second research question were what patterns of change and closeness characterize alienated parent-child relations over time. So that is the analysis of the actual visual representations of the relationship. So in terms of method, this was a qualitative study design. I used in-depth interviews. To recruit, I used the email listserv, PASG, PASI, and Facebook recruiting through support groups. To be included in this study, parents had to have been divorced and alienated from their child, who is now an adult, so 18 or older, or an actual alienated adult child, and then had to have also been reconnected, because I did want to get that full trajectory of the potential PA bond throughout the lifespan. All participants were pre-screened via a questionnaire that I used Baker and Darnell's behaviors to make sure that alienation did occur. I recruited 23 parents, 17 mothers, and 6 fathers. The average age of reconnection for those children of the parents was 20 years old. And then I only recruited 4 adult children. I found that it was very difficult, even eligible adult children, to have them participate in such a potentially re-traumatizing interview. So it was difficult to have them actually participate, so that was a limitation. But of the 4 adult children that I was able to talk to, they were all alienated from their father for an average of 16 years. So for the procedure, I used the retrospective interview technique as the turning point graph. I used the turning point graph as a visual representation throughout our interview. So the interview, basically, we went through each turning point event, and I asked specific questions about each event. How did it impact your closeness? What happened? What was it like for you? And on average, those interviews lasted for about 75 minutes for both parents and adult children. They were audio recorded and transcribed, and I thematically analyzed both the turning points and the representations, the graphs. On average, the parents reported 8 turning points, and the adult children reported 9 turning points. And then I also triangulated by perspective of data, which is just our fancy qualitative way of saying I compared between the parents' results and the children's results. So here are a few de-identified examples of parent turning point graphs that I was sent and that guided my interviews. You can see I got kind of a wide range of different ways to go about plotting your turning point graph. It is a very personal experience. I got some feedback from a few of my participants that going through this procedure of just thinking through all the impactful events in your relational history and having to plot them down and think them through of how they impacted your closeness with your child or your parent was actually a pretty cathartic experience. So I actually went through it myself because I'm an alienated child as well, and I can attest to that. So if we have any parents or children in the audience today, and you would like to try to do your own turning point graph, I'd be happy to give you some more solid instructions if you want to ask me afterwards. So our results from our parents first. We had 4 turning points that decreased closeness, so decreased the feelings of closeness between the parent and child from the parent perspective. And the first, we have separation. So this was both physical and emotional separation. It involved divorce or marital separation, the parent moving out, or the alienating parent moving away. Also emotional separation, which included also divorce separation, or distanced visits, vacations. So seeing the child, being physically present with the child, but feeling like their closeness was slipping away or not feeling as close as they did before the divorce. We also had interference, alienating parents scheduling fun events during alienated parenting time, interfering with phone calls, interfering with child pickup from school, creating drama, or relabeling new mom. And I have an exemplar quote here from one of our parents. There's so many examples of having my time and then my ex saying, hey, I've got a concert on this date, or I want to go away on this weekend. Wouldn't that be so fun? And my kid's looking at me like, what, can I go, Mom? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm losing more time. We also have confrontation. So this involved more of the child's behaviors, the child throwing a tantrum or exhibiting difficult behavior, child becoming aggressive or arguing with the child, verbal or physical assault, and then the child acting more like the alienating parent and manifesting those behaviors. And then last, for decreasing closeness with the parent's perspective, was accusation, accused of sexual assault, stalking, neglect, being arrested, those sorts of things, all decreased feelings of closeness with their child. And then these are the turning points from the parent's perspective that increase closeness. So reaching out, either the parent initiated it, which would be sending gifts, sending a text messages, going to their place of work, or messaging through social media, or the child would initiate it. They would reach out if they needed advice from this parent, or if they needed a place to stay, or sharing news. Hey, I got this score on this test. An example of this, I would check online. I want to see how they are. I'm still their father, and I looked for her, and I saw that she was engaged. So I saw that she had a registry with Bed Bath & Beyond, and I said, I need to acknowledge this. So I did. And then a couple months later, like July, I got a thank you from her. That was wonderful. And then attending child's events was another turning point that increased feelings of closeness. Those included games, performances, school lunches, graduations, and weddings. And then actually reuniting, so being present with the child, visiting the adult child's home, child visiting parents' home, or vacationing with the child, going to college, or creating positive memories together. And then the child moving, which involved either moving out or moving in. So moving out from the alienating parent's house, or getting kicked out, or running away, or moving in. So a new custody arrangement, child needs a place to stay, child chooses to live with the alienated parent. And one parent said, I think the big turning point of when my daughter turned 18 and she was living with her dad, a big turning point, she moved out on her own. And then our last turning point for parents was third-party involvement. This included family and friends and professionals. So family and friends would check in on the child and relay information to the parent, and that actually increased feelings of closeness between the parent and child, bridging the gap between the parent and child through communication. And then professionals offering communication guidance and therapy, all increased feelings of closeness for the parent and child. And then this is that relational trajectory analysis, RQ2, where you can see visual representations of the relationship across time. So the first type of relational trajectory that was found was labeled disruptive or disrupted, and 11 parents demonstrated this trajectory. And as you can see, it was characterized by just one low point of closeness, with increasing closeness after that one point. And we had 6 mothers and 5 fathers with an average separation of almost 5 years. And then we also had prolonged disruption, which was a little bit smaller of a group, all mothers, and the separation was a little bit longer, so almost 5.5 years. And then we had turbulent, which was 3 parents, the longest average separation, so nearly 12 years, and 2 mothers and 1 father, and also the oldest reconnection age. So from the child's perspective, they're very similar, they overlap. Decreasing closeness, we have separation again, which was very similar. We also have isolation, so limited contact, not seeing the parent or no phone calls. Interference, we also saw alienating parent not allowing contact between other parent and child, so very similar. Important life events, this was kind of a difference between the child and the parent. The alienated parent was either absent, so the child missed them from holidays or moving to college, or the alienated parent was present and it induced fear in the child, which made them decrease feelings of closeness. And then feelings of increased closeness for children, reinitiating contact, so same as the parents, moving back, also the same. These 2 last were just for the children, so the aha moments about PA, so a conversation with other family members, realization of alienating parents, lies or manipulation, those aha moments that sparked realization about PA, or aha moments about the parents, actually seeing the alienated parents' behavior in a positive light, seeing that they weren't necessarily what they had been told their whole life. And then these were the child trajectories, so we had 1 son with a disrupted, and then 3 daughters with a prolonged disruption. So I kind of went over the turning point comparison. We had convergent points between the separation and interference and the initiating contact, and then some major differences in their experiences with their relational trajectories. So overall, I think my study shows that not only is communication research important for understanding PA from an interdisciplinary perspective, but it's also a lifespan phenomenon with 3 general relational trajectories. Generally, we want to minimize the decrease in closeness points and maximize the increase in closeness points. And then there were several limitations and directions for future research. I would love to have a larger and diversified sample, really talk to some adult children, and then also look at non-reconnected relationships. And then just continue communication scholarship in PA, because I believe that is a large area that we can fill with research. So that is my presentation. I would love to take questions, unless we do not have time. Okay.
Does anyone have questions? Yeah. Oh, we need a mic.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I didn't quite understand the difference between the disrupted, that looks like a V, yes, and then the extended disruptive, because in both groups, they were separated for years.
Yes.
So can you explain?
So the main difference between the two were in the disrupted, you had 1 low point of feeling little to no closeness, whereas in the prolonged, parents reported multiple points of feeling little to no closeness. So even though you're right, it was a similar period of time that they felt that low feelings, it was 1 point versus multiple points.
When parents are being asked to recall the closeness of their relationship when many years ago, is there any biases that would show up in that data?
Absolutely. And it's one of the major limitations of the retrospective interview technique. We are asking parents and children to rely on memory, which if we were in our last session, we know that that's not always a reliable source of information. I think it's the turning point analysis and graph is a really good way to reflect back and try to get those relational trajectories, but that is definitely a limitation of the method. Yeah. I can hear you, and I'll
So could you please give an example in your V-shaped graph where child and parent are separated for years as to how a parent would remain feeling close to their child whom they're not having contact with?
So I think if I understand your question correctly, it's actually a limitation of the relational variable closeness. Parents talk to me about the fact that even though they weren't communicating all the time with their children, because it was their child, not necessarily did they feel less close. Does that make sense? So there was still that psychological bond, even though the communication was absent. So does that answer your question? Okay.